Hey there, subscribers, Stubagful here. Now, this is hopefully going to be the first in a series of book recommendation videos. I'm mostly doing this, if anything, because I want to get some recommendations from you guys for stuff that you think that I'd like, because I'm always after inspiration for my own writing and, you know, stuff to keep me occupied on boring train journeys. So I thought I'd start with possibly the most obvious recommendation imaginable, seeing as how I name drop him all the bloody time. So, Rob Sherman is almost certainly primarily known to my audience as the guy who wrote the first Dalek episode of New Who back in 2005, which is how he's always introduced to people on the back cover of every book with his name on. To slightly more in-nerds, such as myself, he's the writer of some of Big Finish's finest audio plays. But I really feel that he should be primarily known for some of the downright weirdest, most daring and confrontational bits of prose that I've ever read. I love the shit out of the themed short story anthologies that he's dedicated his time to since 2005. He's personally referred to his books as uncommercial before, but in the age of the internet, I would argue that anything can become popular given the right marketing. About 10 years ago, I would have said something like Black Mirror would look uncommercial. It's an anthology show, it doesn't sell itself on 1 or 3 single characters, it sells itself on ideas and themes. It doesn't really do merchandise in the same way that, say, Game of Thrones does, and yet now it's a huge success. And Rob's books do very similar things to Black Mirror, so if you like Black Mirror, I totally recommend these. So I'm going to try and sell you these books while keeping spoilers to a minimum, while also trying to break down why they work so well for the people who have read them. His first one's called Tiny Deaths. It's his shortest and is the ideal book to introduce a friend to Rob Sherman's prose, and it feels fucking weird calling his book about death his lightest work. Yeah, if you can't handle the darkness and levels of pitch black humour in Tiny Deaths, then he's probably not the author for you because he only gets darker from here. Tiny Deaths presents a load of occasionally ludicrous, occasionally harsh, but always emotionally affecting scenarios surrounding death in some way, be it the obvious death of a loved one or a death of a part of your life. Something that feels important to you, so much so that the loss of it feels like a tiny part of you has died inside. A little girl dies and is reincarnated as her mother's ashtray and watches her go through the grieving process. Everyone in the world is told the exact time, date and means of their death except for one man. A man dies, goes to hell, and winds up being roommates with Hitler's dog. It's dark, as any text about death would be, but it exaggerates its scenarios so far past the point of dark, to the point where you just can't help but laugh at how absurd everything's gotten. This collection really reminded me of that sketch from Jam where a man wants to kill himself and decides to throw himself out of the first floor window multiple times until it kills him, just in case he changes his mind halfway through. I asked Rob the obvious question when I got the chance to have a drink with him at a convention last year, and yes, he is a fan of Chris Morris's Jam, which I bloody knew he would be. While Rob's always been the type of writer who will do his own thing and fully reach outside the confines of the field that he's working in, now that I've got the full context of his background and his post-show interests, looking back at his work on Doctor Who, it does appear to me that the nature of any franchise is restrictive to a creator's talents, at least in some capacity. While things like Holy Terror and Jubilee are very unlike Sixth Doctor adventures from Classic Who, they're still kind of recognisable. While they are much darker and more twisted, even Dalek is pretty gnarly, especially by New Who standards, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm surprised he got away with. But I found in this book and his following ones that when Rob's imagination is given total free rein to explore the limits of the themes that he wants to deal with, and go on his own uninterrupted journey from point A to point B, he'll end up surprising you more often. The Hitler's dog story in particular starts out very light, fluffy and funny, incredibly imaginative, sort of like the start of a dark joke, but as it goes on and the relationship between the man and Hitler's dog blossoms, you find yourself becoming heavily invested in the scenario. And then as the twists and turns leap out at you, you're confronted by a darkness there that was totally unexpected given the way the story had started out, and with Rob's casual and almost conversational approach to his prose. It's very controlled in the way that it just sort of eases you into that really dark and violent ending that just totally sent chills up my spine. Tiny Deaths is also totally addictive as shit. I don't know what it is about Rob's work that inspires such an enthusiastic reaction in me. Part of me has a sneaking suspicion that he's found a way to lace the words in his books with crack cocaine. Actually, thinking about it, that kinda sounds a bit plausible to me. Is that weird? Hang on a sec, I just need to test something. Oh. I'm alright, I can continue. And while it feels amazing, it's also rather annoying that it's a tiny book and you're probably going to be finished pretty soon, and once it's gone, a book that's this good is going to feel like it's left a gaping hole at the centre of your being. But yeah, start with this one, you won't regret it. The second one is probably his most well known and is called Love Songs for the Shy and Cynical, and as you'd guess from the title, the theme of the collection is love. But it's the most vividly, horrifically different take on love that you're ever likely to come across. It starts out pretty normal by Rob's standards. It's weird, but it's emotionally affecting. A little bit depressing, a little bit uplifting, but mostly recognisable. And that's why it really throws you off guard when it gets darker and more twisted later on. We got a story about a couple who work in the same office, one of them married, going away for a dirty adulterous weekend and accidentally hitting a new type of animal with their car. The entire country of Luxembourg mysteriously vanishes into thin air, taking with it a lady's husband, causing her to go through a strange grieving period unlike any other. But the collection gets more twisted as it goes on, with each story darker and crazier than the last. Rob's the type of writer who really engages with the reader. As I went through the story of a world where when a man and a woman fall in love, they give each other their own heart in a Tupperware box, a wife and a husband break up and she gives him back his heart, and it gets visibly damaged over the course of the story as the husband flies off the handle and starts fucking random strangers. And of course there's Be of Good Cheer, easily one of the darkest stories that Rob's ever written, and it's about a man who falls in love with a woman who's allergic to his own happiness. Which sounds like the quirky premise of a rom-com, but when you actually execute that and see what it entails and what kind of relationship that would be like, that story is fucking traumatic. But it is something that I would recommend everyone on the planet read at least once in their life, because the perspective that it offers on unhealthy relationships that outsiders find difficult to understand is just fascinating. Love Songs for the Shy and Cynical really taps into something that you rarely see in fiction concerning love. It ain't just a simple binary, love is a good and nice and happy thing and it feels amazing. No, Love Songs for the Shy and Cynical exposes the nuances and the darker edges of love. It really taps into that all-consuming intangible force that controls almost every aspect of the human experience. While it should be self-evident, it's really not. We never pay that much attention to this darker angle on love and our submissive position in relation to it. While love feels good and makes you happy, there's something pretty sinister about the idea that humans are ostensibly enslaved to it. Love can make us do crazy, stupid, scary things that we never thought we were capable of. I know it's cliched to say this, but Love Songs for the Shy and Cynical is a book that changed my life, and loads of the stories still haunt me now. It was a massive eye-opener for me, and I've never looked at the world in the same way since. Next up, we got his longest work to date, Everyone's Just So Special. And as per the title, it's primarily about self-centered people attempting to control everything, and the damage that a narrow-minded view of the world can cause. There's a rather disgusting story in here called Time's Table, and it's about this girl who sheds her skin on her birthday, and the skin of her preserved at that age is locked up in the attic with the ghosts of all her previous ages from 1 through to present, and she keeps these dead parts of her past with her all throughout her life. One of my favourites in this collection is about an underconfident magician who performs at children's parties, who comes across a very confrontational audience, and a kid who can perform a much better trick than him, where he eats his own head and just leaves the lips sat at the top of the neck stump offering a self-satisfied, sinister smile. Just the imagery that Rob evokes in this one is totally terrifying, and it's not even really a horror book. I wouldn't really call Rob a horror writer as such, because he's not really trying to shock you. The dark and nasty things that happen in his work are just an element of the reaction that he's hoping to get. There's a truth in his work, a truth about the way that humans act the way that we do, that he's taken and distorted and presented through bizarre scenarios. Uncomfortable truths about who we really are on the inside and the terrible things that we're capable of, and also the way that we try and justify that to ourselves and the world. It ends with a story that's probably my favourite thing he's ever done, called History Becomes You. which is a story about 9/11. I've got to say that it takes a lot of guts to write about 9/11, least of all in a fantasy story, because 9/11 is different to lots of the big world-shaping historical events that he references throughout the book. It's had a huge impact on the world today, and it's pretty much considered off-limits for discussion by people because the memory of it is so recent, so relevant, so visceral. And by presenting a scenario whereby the World Trade Center seemingly magically reappears and disappears every once in a while as the world watches the echoes of the building rippling throughout time, it's a gorgeous metaphor for the ramifications of such a terrible incident coming back to affect the future, and it's almost too beautiful for words. His two more recent collections are Remember Why You Fear Me and They Do the Same Things Different There. They're both mixtures of stories from the first three collections, along with some new stories that are probably going to be a part of their own collection one day. And although you may feel a bit weird paying for books that are half composed of stuff that you've already got, personally I found that when you set the old stories alongside the new ones, they're given fresh context. You find that when you take a story out of an older collection and place it alongside a new one and have it thematically link up, you get a different experience. And lots of the new stories in these I would also call some of the best things that he's ever done, so I'd highly recommend them anyway. Remember Why You Fear Me is mostly comprised of his horror stories. As I mentioned earlier, Rob isn't really a horror writer as such, but his tales are weird, strange, twisted, and do get under your skin, so a collection that filters out the lighter ones and just leaves the pitch black sense of humour and grotesque stories that take place just beneath the veil of our reality, it makes sense and it works really well. One of the most unnerving stories in there that just filled me with dread from beginning to end is a story called Good Grief, and it's about a man whose wife dies in a car accident that wasn't her fault, who meets and makes friends with the husband of the woman in the other car who was responsible for the accident. And this bizarre, almost contemptuous relationship blossoms between them as the first man grieves in a numb, disaffected way, while the other one grieves in a more unpleasant, mania-driven way. It's fascinating, terribly moving, and you're always second guessing what Alex is going to do or say next. They Do the Same Things Different There is the more fantastical of the two. The ideas are a lot more speculative and occasionally pretty abstract, but they're always imaginative and he uses such wonderful imagery, it's like he's trying to paint a surreal landscape with words. We got this story of a world where children are born without tongues, and upon reaching puberty they have to carve their own tongue from tree-sized tongues that grow from the ground, fit it in their mouth and prove that they can speak well in front of an audience before they can achieve adulthood. It's this beautiful metaphor for a child's fear of being incapable of overcoming their parents' and society's expectations in order to succeed in a bizarre, eccentric, nightmarish and yet strangely recognisable world. One of my favourites is a new one called Mond, and it's worth the price of admission alone for me. It's about a woman who kidnaps a man and invents a new language for them to speak in by swapping words with other ones. Apple is now lampshade. Banana is now caterpillar. Strawberry is now plinge. And it continues swapping words around until you'd think that the story is almost completely impenetrable gibberish, but you'd be surprised, it still makes total sense. Mond was a real eye-opener. If you take a stereotypical scenario like a kidnapping, you'll find that so many words in our language are interchangeable, and when you interchange them for anything else, you can still make sense of it. But yeah, I've probably read these books more than anything else on my bookshelf. I usually either binge reread a collection, or just read the odd story here and there whenever I feel like it, or if I'm in between novels. But yeah, in conclusion, buy this stuff. Buy it now. Trust me, you will never be the same again.